How's it going, super friends? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Brad, the DC Universe Geek, and today let's talk about the DC Superheroes action figure line. Previously, I reviewed the Batman figure from Wave 1, but I figured why not show you the rest of the figures that I have in the series as well. I don't have them all, but what I do have, I'm happy to share with you. Think of it as action figure show and tell. Now, starting with Superman, I'm going to go through these as quick as I possibly could. I was going to go through these wave by wave, but I figured I will just do it this way instead because it'll likely be faster and easier to do. So this Superman figure, still to this day, is lauded by many as one of the best Superman figures ever made, and I certainly think that that's an absolutely correct statement for many reasons. For one, he had a fantastically comic accurate head sculpt for the day, a gigantic S on his chest, and all of his details were actually sculpted on, which was very cool. Some things that I didn't like about this figure, and a lot of people also who bought this figure didn't like about it, were one, the wide stance. It's impossible to close them legs up without them just bending and looking weird. So there's that, and then they get wibbly, and flying poses are really just kind of difficult with this figure when the legs won't close. And also the fact that all the red tones on this figure are muted, and a lot of people, myself included, would have rather had a little bit of a brighter red than this muted red tone that's almost like a brownish red. Here's the Batman, whom I've already done a review of just recently, so you could just check that video out if you'd like to see him. But here's the Batman from Wave 1. Here we've got Parasite, who would later go on to see a release again in a Superman Parasite 2-pack. Again, this is a pretty good figure. I really do like most of the figures in the DC superheroes, the ones that weren't just rehashes. And the body sculpt for this guy, I think, is pretty much perfect for what he looked like in the comics in the day. That great big bulbous neck muscles. This guy looks like he's just been at the gym lifting. I would never ask this guy if he lifts, bro, because it's evident that he does. Only he doesn't actually. He's just a parasite. He gets that way from sucking people's powers. The deco for this guy was pretty cool, and they did something with this guy that Mattel stopped doing with the DC Universe Classics on a lot of their figures, and that is the lines here. They're not just painted on, there's sculpting detail as well. So between the actual shading of the figure, the sculpted details that they've included where they're supposed to paint, the fact that, yes, he has ankle rockers too, this is a fantastic figure. I mean, I love that face sculpt. He looks like that's your grandmommy after she's really drunk and home from the bar and wants you to give her a kiss. Give your grandmommy a kiss! Yeah! And next we're going to look at Mr. Freeze. You'll have to pardon the fact that he's got loose, weak, wibbly ankles. This is actually a repaint of a 2002 Batman series, Mr. Freeze, only with a more adult deco to it. That's number one. There's more stuff that's been painted on it. And the squirty backpack doesn't actually work on this one. There's no place to put the water. It doesn't hold the water, but you can tell just by looking at the guns in the backpack, it is the same sculpt. They've just simpled it down for an adult collector market because what adult wants to shoot squirt guns, right? Squirt guns are for kids. Hello, so are action figures. Technically, we just never grew up, so you started making them for us. Anyhow, the sculpt on this guy looks absolutely fan-frickin-tastic. One of my favorite DC figures as well. The only thing I don't like about him is he's so big, he takes up so much room, and once those ankles start to get weak, that's it. It's all over, pal. You're dealing with a figure that doesn't want to stand up. But other than that, again, and I'm going to say this a lot for this series of figures, there was a ton of work, a ton of money that must have gone into new tooling. So yeah, that's Mr. Freeze. He's off camera. Let's put him back on camera. I'm just gonna run out of room. I'm gonna have to do a swap out eventually. And then we have Lex Luthor, and I'm bringing him out second because he actually does share a lot of the same parts with that Mr. Freeze. They've actually got the exact same legs. No kidding, seriously, the same legs. The boots are actually on backwards on Luthor. The hoses go the opposite way on Mr. Freeze, but exactly the same legs. Everything else though, oh, and the same biceps here, the same arms as the Mr. Freeze, but everything else was new tooling as far as I can tell. And this is such a fantastic mix of the classic late 70s to 80s Lex Luthor power suit. It seems to do a great job of capturing that classic look while giving it a more modern technological twist with more details. One of the things that they did different when they reused this exact same sculpt for the DC Universe Classics is, I'm not sure if it's going to show up in camera, but there are some little goldish highlights on his armor here. They certainly did do a little bit more in the way of paying attention to the paint deco for the DC Superheroes version in comparison to the DC Universe Classics. Next we have Lord Darkseid. There is a dark blue variant, but I prefer the lighter blue. I like my Darkseids a bit lighter blue. People have complained that this Darkseid is a bit, or a lot, depending on who you are, on the small side, and I can totally see that. I like my Darkseid generally to be a little bit bigger. However, I don't want to have to be the one to point this out, but I'm gonna have to, and that's that this Darkseid is not completely inaccurate in scale. He has been depicted this size many times historically in the comics in comparison to Superman. It's not completely inaccurate, although I'm right there with you in thinking that I do like a larger Darkseid. One thing about this figure, though, that can't be faulted is the amazing attention to detail that they have given to this figure over at the Four Horsemen Studios. And they've also got some shading in this figure, much like with the rest of them, something that they seem to eventually stop doing with the DC Universe Classics. Some of the early ones did, but later on they just stopped shading pretty much completely. But there is so much minute, fine detail on this guy that, in my opinion, this guy is a solid contender for top 5 Mattel DC Superheroes figures. Absolutely. We'll stick him over here in front of the Parasite and bring out Brainiac. Now this figure is one that if you're my age, you're immediately going to recognize this as pretty much the first time, the first look for a Brainiac you were ever introduced to with the Kenner Superpowers line. This is what Brainiac looked like through a chunk of the 70s and a chunk of the 80s, when a lot of you who were watching this likely would have grown up if you're my age. And this is a fantastic rendition, and again, I'm going to say this a lot, but they've done a fantastic job with the sculpting. They've got 2 tones of paint, the silver with the blue over top here, filling in the cracks and crevices. They've got the shoulders with the domes that have all that technological gobbledygook right there, and the same thing with his brain dome here. Careful, Brainiac, we can see what you're thinking. They did a great job with this, and there's plenty of articulation for this guy. It doesn't always work. He's got it in the waist, he's got it in the torso, bicep swivels, shoulders. He's even got articulation down here in the, what exactly are these? Anyway, he's got articulation there in the I don't know what. Anyway, he really is a fantastic figure, and even though he's not my favorite Brainiac, he's definitely my favorite Brainiac figure. And honestly, I would put this Brainiac figure in the contention for top 5. Next we have John Henry Irons, aka Steel. What a fantastic figure, absolutely. I love the fact they've used 2 tones here. They have a silver and then a grayish kind of silver, and it really works. It brings out the details in the Four Horsemen sculpt with this guy. You can really tell the difference between his rocket boots and the fuel lines that go down to the boots right here, and the packs for the fuel, his whole waist area, the shoulder pauldrons, the S on the chest here. You can that stuff really stands out against the darker, dare I say, almost gunmetal, silverish gray of the figure. Really, really fantastic, and awesome all-around sculpt as well. Really, really love this guy. And just like with Darkseid and with Brainiac, this guy is absolutely in my contention for the place in top 5, definitely. Let's see if I can fit him over here. And here we have Bizarro. This is actually the one that came out alongside the Superman. Mine is really, really wiggly because this is actually the first one that I owned, and his articulation is really, really wiggly. The first one here, you'll note, had like a maroon with blue here, and the skin color, his flesh color, was not actually chalky white like typically Bizarro is depicted. But he's a fantastic figure, absolutely. Definitely skipped leg day because they used the same lower half as they did with Superman. So his top half is just altogether massive and bulky. I think that the only thing they did wrong with this figure really is they should have given him a newly sculpted lower half so that his waist, which actually the lower half of his body here is also shared with Superman, they wouldn't have had to share it. He could have been a completely new tooled figure. However, I realized that Mattel likely had to save costs and decided to do it this way for that reason. There are 2 variants of this figure. I believe that it was this one that came out next, with that one in tow following afterwards. And with these 2, while they both had that grayish color flesh tone, with this one, they actually got the skin tone right. It's that chalkier white color Bizarro flesh tone, which I think actually definitely makes this figure pop more. And he's got brighter colors, although this one right here is definitely, in my opinion, a more accurate Bizarro for the time, because he's got the purple and the more purple, lots of purple. If I could mix these two together, that would probably be my ideal DC Superheroes Bizarro. And next we have small body Doomsday, and a lot of people over the years have said that this figure is just way too small for them to own in comparison to how large he should be in comparison to Superman, and I can definitely see their point, although, if I'm being honest, I'm not going to complain too much. If this was the only Doomsday figure I could get my hands on, I'd be like, well, it ain't the best, but it certainly could be a lot worse, because the sculpting detail for this guy looks pretty good. All of his bony protrusions are actually made out of a softer rubber. His knees, all of them, they're all made out of a softer rubber, but they did a fine job with the sculpting detail of this guy. His head, maybe perhaps, is just a little bit too small looking in comparison to his body, but honestly, I really think that you could do worse with this guy. I like him. He's not my favorite, not in the top 5, but certainly a reasonable attempt. A reasonable first attempt at that for Mattel to create a Doomsday figure to add into their 6-inch action figure line. And next we have leg spread pop and a squat Bane. And I say that only because if you want him to look so that he's not too ridiculous looking with his legs all spread out wide, like that's about as wide as you would go, you really do have to kind of bend his legs together, which makes him look much shorter than probably he should look in comparison to the Batman. So I call him popping a squat Bane or spready legs Bane. But aside from that, his spready legs, a feature that no fan ever asked for ever, he isn't a terrible figure, all things considered. For one, the body sculpt of this guy looks pretty fantastic. He's big, he's bulky, he's filled with venom, he's muscly. The face sculpt looks, you know, pretty much fairly comic accurate. He's got the venom tubes going around down the side there into the injector. He's got those great big roided out back muscles. He's not a terrible figure, but also not ideal for a lot of us collectors. One thing of note with this guy is he's actually got an action feature, which is something that, if I'm not mistaken, none of the other DC superheroes had. It's a smash action feature, which is kinda cool, I'm not gonna lie, although I'll never use it, and I actually also only recently discovered it making this video. I know, how stupid is that? Next we have Mattel's first foray into making 6-inch scale Supergirl figures, the Linda Danvers version, and all things considered, she's actually pretty good. The S on her chest has actually been sculpted there rather than just painted, so that's cool. And really, the entirety of the figure itself is all newly sculpted detail, so that's definitely a plus as well. No reused parts here. The only thing that a lot of people seem to be in agreement about with this figure is that the face sculpt for Linda Danvers Supergirl just doesn't quite sit right. There's something maybe a bit off about it. It seems like it might be a little bit, I don't know, squished in. I'm not really sure, but I'm definitely of the same mind that if it had a better head sculpt, this figure would be improved like 1,000%. And next we have, oh wait, this is getting kind of crazy. Let's back these guys out of the picture and start over again with a new cast of characters. And next we have the Wave 1 Scarecrow figure. I call him the skinny, spindly legs, tiny head Scarecrow. Although I can't really say that now because I did a head swap on this guy a long time ago, but the original head sculpt that came with this Scarecrow figure was definitely really small and weird, and I didn't like it, so I swapped it for the DC Universe Classics Sinestro Corps version of Scarecrow. And I think after doing that, this is a fantastic figure, and if I'm not mistaken, let's just get his weird pitchfork scythe out of the way. This was the first of Mattel's DC superheroes figures to use a much upgraded version of articulation. He's got the hinges in the groin there, he's got at the top of the leg there, he's got a swivel, the knees, he's got a swivel at the top of the boots, he's got the ankles with the rockers, spinning up here in the torso, he's got the hinges in the armpits, he's got rotation at the biceps, the elbows, the rotation at the gloves, and the head, which I believe is on a ball joint underneath here, underneath the little neck piece here. So I think that aside from the fact that he sculpted and painted and has the shading and shadows and stuff fantastically, it looks entirely comic accurate. Aside from that, which was a selling point for me for this guy, it's the fact that he also had more articulation and I could, you know, put him in different weird poses on the shelf. Until, of course, he got wibbly and loose, and now he's almost impossible. I kind of have to lean him against other figures, otherwise he just falls over. Matter of fact, let's just lean him against the back for now, because there ain't no way he's going to stand on his own. And next we have Azrael, another figure who can be kind of hard to stand up. Definitely, you know, pretty wibbly. He gets loose over time. Almost anyone that owns this, I bet, can contest to that. But if you can get past the fact that his torso and his legs and knees and everything, the articulation can get kind of loose and weird, and his leg stance is possibly a little bit too wide to begin with. If you can get past all of that, what you're left with is a very fantastically cool looking figure. I mean, just look at them, their bladed fire gauntlets. Don't they look absolutely rad? I certainly think so. I love all the two-tone paintwork they've done with this guy. They've even went ahead and sculpted the lines on his face. They're not just painted on like Mattel would do in latter series of figures in the DC Universe Classics. Fantastically done. Bravo. The only problem, as I've mentioned, is the fact that this guy here, as far as his ankles and his knees goes, he can be a little bit difficult to stand up. And here it is, he's calling me a liar. Once you get his legs right, then you got to get his head up, and then the knee wants to bend down. Certainly one of the figures that I put on my shelf when I lean against the wall or whatever. I don't try to have him standing by himself, because inevitably he always falls over and causes a domino effect. So you can go like that in the back too. And next we have a Wave 1 Killer Croc with a fantastic paint deco. That's one thing that this figure absolutely shines at. Between the green and the yellowish color here, looks absolutely fantastic. And the same thing goes with that head sculpt. This is probably one of my favorite face sculpts in the entire DC superheroes line. Now, where this figure shines as far as paint deco goes and sculpting detail, it definitely lacks in the way of articulation, because sure, he's got the shoulders that are on them, they're rounded hinges, he can swivel at the waist, he's got the wrists, the head has got some basic articulation, and the ankles have little tiny hinges. That's really it. I mean, sure, he's got the hinged groin there, but it makes it really difficult to get him into a good pose when there's no articulation whatsoever in the knees and no articulation whatsoever in the elbows, nothing in the biceps. He's very, very limited in exactly how many poses you can get this guy into. So definitely one of the coolest figures in the line, but also one of the most limiting. Let's see if we can start standing these bad boys up. None of these guys want to stand. That's the problem. They all have a tendency to fall over. Oh, this is gonna be a tricky one. Come on, just lean on Killer Croc, Azzy. And you could just stay there until I give you someone to lean on. Next we have Clayface, and in my opinion, a fantastic figure in the line. Definitely inspired as a mix of Batman the Animated Series and contemporary to how he looked in the comic books at the time. Look at that face. It's got a face only a mother could love. Very, very cool. Love the two-tone browns here. This actually looks, as far as I'm concerned, kind of like Clay. I mean, kind of like Turd, but Clayface always sort of looks like Turd. A really cool figure with, actually for something this big, he's got a fair amount of articulation. Like, it really seems like they attempted to give someone a figure this big, you know, a reasonable amount of posability. I mean, it's not perfect, but you got to remember, for back in the day, this was pretty good. And we know that the DC superheroes were basically Mattel's answer to Marvel Legends, but they didn't want to give their figures toe articulation and knuckle articulation and stuff like that, and big rounded ball shoulders. In my opinion, some of the early Marvel Legends were some of the ugliest action figures ever made. There, I said it! But what I don't like about this figure, and I think it's absolutely detrimental, is the fact that the arms are actually soft, they're squishy, and I'm not sure, I think they're just the wires. I think he's got wires in his arms. Yeah, because you can see the little holes right there that you get when you have bendy figures. And I think that is a grade A mistake, a grade Z move for this figure, because the arms are just attached in the body via a wire. I get what they're going for with it. I just think it was kind of definitely an absolutely stupid idea. And as you can see, the more you touch those extremities, the more the paint comes off, and it just ends up looking terrible. I've got two of these, and both of them have the exact same problem. Next we have the reused body buck Tim Drake action figure. I believe that this guy was from Wave 3. I think I've gone ahead and repainted his torso on account of I don't like that dreaded maroon color on a Robin tunic. Gotta make sure that that's red because Robin wears red. I have gone ahead and switched the cape. I did not like the DC Superheroes cloth goods cape. To this day, this is my favorite Tim Drake action figure on account of the fact that it has the absolute most accurate sculpted detail of any Tim Drake Robin figure ever. The belt comes down into a slight V, 4 strings for his tunic. The Robin symbol actually has sculpted detail around it. He's got the storage spaces up here on the tops of his arms here, the padded gloves. He's got the toes in his boots. This is a fantastic Robin figure. I will say that I'm not super keen on the face sculpt, but still, at this point, they've yet to give us a better, accurate, classic Tim Drake Robin figure. Next we have Two-Face Harvey Dent, probably one of my favorite figures in the entire line. For one, I love the color scheme. I love the purple and the black and the yellow. Definitely a very, very scary version of Two-Face. Love the pinstripes over the white. And I don't think the gun, this is actually the Fortnite Tommy gun. I don't know where the Tommy gun for mine went, but this is the Fortnite one. Definitely one of the coolest figures in the series. And he goes for a buttload on eBay right now. So don't even think of trying to get him unless you inherit a bunch of money or something. Next we have Cassandra Cain, Batgirl. And if you have an itch for a DC Universe Classic style 6-inch version of this figure, this is the only one that you'll be able to find. And for that reason, she's incredibly hard to get. And they never reused her. This is the only time she ever came out. She wasn't released in the DC Universe Classics a second time like Batgirl was, and Clayface, and oh geez, just a slew of them were released again in the DC Universe Classics. This is the only time she was released. She's incredibly hard to find, and oh look, she reuses the top of Batgirl's boots by the look of it. But have no fear, she does have her very own newly uniquely sculpted to her belt. That looks like it's Batman's, but it's not. It's actually all hers. And it's a fantastic figure. I got her when she was still relatively cheap. I can't recall what accessories she came with, and personally, I don't really care. It was likely just a batarang. I'm just happy to have the figure. Don't fall over. Oh, she almost fell over. You would have taken Robin with you. She took Robin with her. Next we have Catwoman, another figure who demands a pretty big penny on the secondary market on account of she's also pretty hard to find. Mattel did go ahead and re-release this figure in purple, but in my opinion the black one was definitely way better. The only complaint is I really wish they had painted her goggles silver around the edges rather than just leaving them black. But she came with a cool backpack, which, you know, that's accurate to the character. You know, she runs around with a backpack on. She also came with a great big long Catwoman whip. And she came with a little kitty cat here, a little black cat as an accessory. And she came with some pearls. But these pearls aren't white, they're black. I really should paint those. Much like the other figures in the series, she has a lot of unique to her sculpted detail, like the belt, and even on her body here, the midsection and the torso, you've got all that sculpted detail that hasn't just been painted on, like was done in latter waves of DC Multiverse figures. Her boots have all kinds of new sculpted detail on them, so definitely one of the best figures in the series, but also much like the Two-Face and the Cassandra Cain, definitely some of the hardest. Actually, a lot of the DC superheroes are some of the hardest to get your hands on. Like, try to find Azrael. It goes for an arm and a leg as well. That makes me all the more thankful that you sent it to me. Thanks, Chris. And then we have Mongul, one of my favorite figures in this series. I like this paint deco in some ways better than the re-released version in the DC superheroes. This is definitely more muted and more up my alley. Aw, darn it. Catwoman fell into his butt. He had a load of new details. Some people actually really despise this figure because they don't like his size, but I certainly think it's passable. Maybe it's a bit on the small side, but I really like this guy a lot. I love the gritted taste of Mongol, gonna burn the flash your face in. This is just a fantastic figure, and honestly, if you can find this one as opposed to the DC Universe Classics version, I probably would get this one as opposed to the re-release because I think he's fantastic. Here we have Supergirl. She's going to be a footnote in the video on account of the fact that she's so heavily customed that most of her is actually not the original parts. I mean, the boots are original, and the torso and the arms are original, and, you know, the midsection, but the skirt, the cape, the head, all been replaced. And yes, she's got a glorious S on the back now. But I couldn't leave her as is because I feel like this version of Supergirl in her original form was just a really ugly looking figure. And next we have the Cyborg Superman, and for many people this is the only one they've ever been able to get their hands on. It's not a terrible figure. It's got a lot going for it. It does have the muted red, the same as the Superman figure in this line has, kind of a brownish red, and it doesn't show up that way on the camera. Believe me, it is a brownish red. And he's also got the dreaded wide stance. You can't push them legs together anymore. So those are definitely two things about this figure that I really don't like. But other than that, I think he's really cool. This arm has been resculpted. His leg from the knee down is all new sculpted detail. And you wouldn't think it, but so is the torso. Don't believe me? Well, sure, this piece up here is just resting on top of the torso, but down here, this is actually sculpted onto the body. So this is actually a newly sculpted torso altogether, along with a brand new snazzy head. And you got the Cyborg Superman. I like this figure a lot. Not my favorite in the series. Certainly thankful to have him, but I've got mixed feelings about him. I really like him, and I also don't at the same time. Because he suffers from the same things that the Superman suffers from. You'd figure they could have corrected that by then. And finally, I do have the Batman figure, as you can see. Oh great, Batman knocked everyone over. Go home, Batman, you're drunk. So Batman here, the same one that knocked all these guys over, is the final figure I wanted to show you in my DC Superheroes collection. Now, yeah, I did swap up the heads. I did change the heads, and currently that one's being used on a custom. I think that the more slender, smaller head fits on the more slender body. Definitely a lot better. Can you tell the recipe for this Batman figure? Leave it down in the comment section below. But this Batman figure, in my opinion, still holds the crown jewels achievement of best 6-inch Batman figure overall of all time. For one, the bat has been sculpted onto his chest. That utility belt looks darn near perfect. It's got that leathery look to it. I love the two tones of paint. His gauntlets here even have some details on them that make them pop and stand out that much more. And the same thing goes with his boots. There is so much attention to detail, seams and lines and stuff in this figure that I can't help but give this one the best 6-inch Batman figure award. And honestly, out of all of my DC Superheroes figures, especially ones contending for top 5, this one is tops. This, in my opinion, is the best of the best when it comes to the DC superheroes. Now, I know at this point there probably are people wondering exactly what my top 5 are, and I know I said that Two-Face was going to be in there, but after careful deliberation, this is what I came up with. Even with the original head and not the Jim Lee head, which is currently on the shoulders, Batman comes in at number 1, Brainiac 2, Steel 3, Darkseid 4, and Mongul at number 5. That's my list, and I'm sticking to it. But yeah, that's the sum total of all my Mattel DC Superheroes action figures. I'm glad that you stuck around till the end and I had a chance to share it with you. Just a little kind of survey dealio thing here. If you did stick around till the end, please leave it down in the comment section below so I know who did, so I can get a taste on should I do more videos like this or not. If they're too long, there ain't no point in me doing it. Any other comments you have, just leave them down in the comment section below. If you want to see more of my DC content show up in your inbox, then I invite you today to become a super friend and join the DC squad by hitting the subscribe button. And I will see you with the next one. Have a DC day, everybody, and take care.